The Arizona Diamondbacks haven't been to the postseason since 2017, but have they arrived earlier than expected, and why we should no longer put a ceiling on what this D-backs team can do?
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. You're listening to who? Millard Thomas, host of this podcast. Been doing it since 2020, and so good to see the D-backs finally in the postseason. Thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day, and please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube, and of course, we're on all your streaming platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, as I already said. And for today's podcast, I want to talk to you guys about the numbers for the D-backs this season. We'll break down how the D-backs got to this point of the playoffs, heading home up 2-0 against the Dodgers. What have worked for the D-backs through the first 4 games? We're going to be breaking it down in segment number 2 and number 3. We'll look at offensive numbers, pitching numbers, even a little defense. So we got a whole lot to talk about. But before we get there, I first want to start this conversation by talking about this D-backs team and their expectation level for the rest of this season, because I think entering this year, we all felt like this was just a year where the D-backs needed to finish around 500, right? Just be in the playoff mix, just be competitive and take another step forward. But once this D-backs team made it to the postseason, like we said, all we were thinking of, if they could beat the Milwaukee Brewers, anything after that is just gravy, right? We think they can beat the Brew Crew, but anything after that would be pretty ridiculous if the D-backs were able to win, another series after that, because they would be facing the Dodgers and, either the Phillies or the Braves. So it felt like the D-backs, if we won the wild card round, that would have been our World Series. That would have been enough to satisfy D-backs fans for the rest of the postseason. But now you look at the D-backs. They're heading home 2-0 against the Dodgers after sweeping them in LA. Now I have to ask the questions. Have the D-backs arrived earlier than expected? And are they a true World Series contender? Because the last time the D-backs faced the Dodgers in 2017, it was not pretty, right? The D-backs had a fantastic electric wild card series a few days earlier against the Colorado Rockies. If you go back, look at the box score, absolutely insane. Go watch the highlights of that game too. Really a lot of fun. That was here in Arizona. That was that my freshman year or my second year in college? Crazy stuff by the D-backs back in 2017 against the Rockies. But then they faced the Dodgers and they got little broed in that series, right? The Dodgers went up 2-0 in LA against the D-backs. They scored 17 runs in those 2 games. And when the D-backs went back home, they didn't exactly defend home field. They didn't exactly defend Chase Field. Their offense was pretty non-existent in that game 3 to the Dodgers. And the D-backs ended up getting swept. But now we see this D-backs team heading up 2-0 before even playing a game in front of their home fans, not just against the Dodgers, but this entire postseason. And this D-backs team is young, right? We didn't expect them to be here. And not only are they here, they're absolutely dominating right now. And it's making me stop having expectations for the rest of this postseason. With what I've seen from the D-backs through one wild card round, I was like, okay, D-backs elite in that wild card round, but I still think they're going to lose in 4 to the Dodgers. But now what I've seen through the first 2 games of LA, my mindset is, let's just let it play out. Let's just watch the postseason. Let's enjoy with what we're seeing from the D-backs, and let's not put any more expectations on this D-backs team, because from what I've seen this postseason, and we'll get into the numbers later, anything is possible for this D-backs team right now. It's like when I went to Vegas this past weekend. I put my 20 in the Wheel of Fortune machine, my go-to machine, and guess what? I got the bonus spins. I got the bonus wheels, and during the game when I saw my money racking up, I didn't know when it was going to stop. I just kept hitting spin, spin, spin. I watched the money pile up. I didn't know when the ride was going to end. I was just enjoying the journey. The destination did end up giving me a nice little chunk of change in my pocket. And for this D-backs team, I'm hoping the journey ends in a World Series. But even if that doesn't happen to be the case, I think this has still been a credible postseason for the D-backs. But the reason why I'm not putting an expectation or a ceiling on this D-backs team for the rest of the playoffs is because this D-backs team, what they're doing this year, I think is a little reminiscent of what we saw from the 2014 Royals, who I think was another team who exceeded expectations throughout the season and then arrived a lot earlier than people expected when that team got to the postseason. The reason why people felt like the Cardinals were a team that was just happy to be there entering the postseason was because when we look at the Royals from the regular season, their offense was pretty mid. I don't think they had like one position player with like an 800 OPS. Like it was not that good. The average age of the team was 28.3, so pretty young. This D-backs team right now is like 27 and a half, so not too far. And they hadn't made the playoffs since the last time they won the World Series, which was 1985. So the Royals went like 30 years between playoff appearances. So it's not a surprise to think that when that Royals team made the postseason, people were like, yeah, that Royals team, they're scrappy. Maybe they could win a postseason game, but ultimately they're just happy to be there. And what did the Royals end up doing in that postseason? Well, they swept the wild card round, they swept the divisional series, and they swept the championship series. That was a 89 win wild card Royals team that went round by round and didn't lose a game. Something that we're seeing the D-backs do right now as they have gone 4-0 in the postseason so far. I think the D-backs do have a chance to do what the Royals did. And also, the Royals, they swept through the American League. They got to the World Series. Now, they didn't win the World Series, but it was competitive. It was a 7-game World Series where the Royals scratched and clawed. And so they just arrived a lot earlier than expected. They got hot during the postseason and carried that all the way to the World Series. And I want to ask, why can't the D-backs do that? Now, if the reason is competition, I won't disagree. I do think the D-backs potential run is a lot harder than what the Royals went through, because if you look at what the Royals went through, they faced the Oakland A's in round one. The A's are a Moneyball team. They're a team that can win regular season games, but they always fall short in the postseason. They faced the Angels, Mike Trout's only time in the playoffs where he had one hit. I'm not even going to get into it. Then they faced the Baltimore Orioles in the ALCS. The Orioles are another team notoriously not known for doing anything in the postseason. So the Royals, I don't know what happened to the American League playoffs that year, but it was a bunch of teams who historically have not done anything in the playoffs, and it was the Royals that made it out of that group. The D-backs potentially would have to go through the 92-win Brewers, this 95-plus win Dodgers team, and then either the Phillies, the reigning NL champs, or the Braves, who have probably the best team from top to bottom. So I do think the D-backs have a tougher run. But when you look at what the Royals did in 2015, I think the most important thing that the Royals got from that was both experience and confidence that they gained. If you go to the World Series in your first year, back to the playoffs after a while, I think it's just going to empower you. I think it's going to make you believe in yourself more. And then you also know what you need to do for next time to get the job done. And that's exactly what the Royals did in 2015, because in 2015, the Royals came back the very next season, had a better regular season, and then they won the World Series. The D-backs, they might be ahead of the schedule themselves, and I think they look ready to compete right now. That's why I'm saying you can't put a ceiling on this team any longer. You look at the offense, which we're going to get into. You look at the pitching. All of it has been fantastic. This D-backs team has looked like arguably the best team in the playoffs, and it's why we can't put a ceiling on this team any longer. Whatever happens, Mike Hazen knows he has a legit squad, and once we get to the offseason, he has to do everything in his power to maximize the talent on this roster. Now we'll break down the D-backs by the numbers this postseason to see what has worked so well for them in their success as they've gone 4-0 through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. But before we get there, I first need to talk to you guys about Jace Medical, because everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jace Medical offers the Jace Case. The Jace Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you're not just hoping they have access to medication in an emergency. Jace Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jace Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics today from Jace Medical by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. And don't forget to catch every D-backs pitch on their hometown broadcast when you download the Sirius XM app and search up Diamondbacks. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's look at some numbers for the D-backs this postseason because, of course, the D-backs have been phenomenal on pretty much every side of the ball. You look at offense, you look at pitching, you look at defense. There really hasn't been a weakness for this D-backs team so far, and it's so crazy because this team, when you look at the regular season, like they were middle of the pack in pretty much every category. Offense, like they were cool. They were really good in the first half. Then they kind of evened out by their second half performers. Same with the pitching staff. Like the bullpen was really solid in the first half. Same with the rotation. Both of it tailed off in the second half. So like by the end of the season, the D-backs were middle of the pack in a lot of stats. It's not that surprising considering the D-backs finished, near middle of the pack in terms of record. Like they were a playoff team, but they still were only 84 wins or whatever. I honestly don't even remember what the D-backs record is at this point of the season because the only record that matters to the D-backs at this point of the year is 4-0 because the D-backs have won the first 4 games of the playoffs all on the road. The only other team to do that this postseason is the Texas Rangers out there in the American League, and they did win today. They did win today and moved on against Baltimore. So hopefully the D-backs can match what the Rangers are doing and get the sweep against the LA Dodgers. Real quick aside, I just want to say I picked the Rangers as like my dark horse team before the playoffs in the American League. I thought it was going to be the battle of Texas in the ALCS. I feel really good about that prediction. That's the end of my sidebar on the American League playoffs and the Texas Rangers. The first thing that I want to talk about, though, when it comes to the D-backs and their numbers, this one's not really a number. This one's more of a question. But is Corbin Carroll the best player in the sport right now? Because let's talk about a few of his numbers. He's second right now in both OPS and average. He's first in runs scored, and he's third in walks. This guy has reached base 12 times so far this postseason, tying another rookie, Evan Carter, for the most number of times reaching base through the first 4 games just this year. That number is also tied for the third most in MLB postseason history. Corbin Carroll has been an absolute freak of nature this postseason when it comes to getting on base. Those first couple games against the Brewers and that first one against the Dodgers, like he was doing a lot with his bat and, of course, drawing walks. Like every plate appearance Corbin Carroll has, you can just see the patience. He's not chasing anything. He looks super calm. Like there's been a lot of talk about Corbin Carroll's demeanor because sometimes like show a little bit more emotion at times. I think there are times where Corbin Carroll gets pretty fired up, but for the most part, he is a cool, calm, collected guy, and he just makes things look so easy out there on the baseball field. And when you think about his talent, how dynamic he is, he showed every skill and tool set he has so far in the postseason. He showed the speed, he showed the defense, he showed the hitting power. I think most importantly, he showed the IQ. He showed the clutchness. He showed the toughness for the big moments. I think one thing we don't talk about enough in baseball, and I bring it up with some of the star players because you can actually see it in the stats. We don't talk enough about the intangibles, right? We don't talk enough about the players whose numbers actually get better with runners in scoring position, the players whose numbers actually get better in the second half of the season, the players whose numbers get better in the postseason, or their numbers get better as the game goes on. Corbin Carroll is one of those guys. He was the best rookie from start to finish in the regular season. And he was such a good rookie that he's going to finish probably top 5 in MVP voting. We get to the postseason. Corbin Carroll only goes up another level and is arguably the best player in the postseason right now. When you look at the statistics, like the only other guys you can argue are probably Jordan Alvarez, who I would probably take over Corbin Carroll, honestly. I mean, Jordan Alvarez, I think, is just the scariest player in baseball right now at the plate. Or it's probably like a Corey Seager. Like, there's not many players. Like, it's like a list of maybe 5 guys at most they can even say is in the conversation with what Corbin Carroll has done this postseason. And if you told a D-backs fan or anybody who watches baseball that Corbin Carroll would have been the best player in the postseason, I don't think it would have been too surprising. I don't think it would have been that much of a shock, but I still think you would have had pretty incredible odds and value on FanDuel if that was a prop bet. So I think Corbin Carroll being the best player in the postseason, I think that's starting to play out, and I think he's going to continue to be at least the most dynamic player in the postseason. Jordan Alvarez might be the scariest, but I think Corbin Carroll is the most dynamic. Here's another stat for you guys, another number. 6.5. That's the runs. That's the amount of runs a game the D-backs are currently averaging right now in the postseason. In the regular season, this D-backs team averaged 4.6 runs per game. It was solid. That number was a lot higher in the first half, like I explained earlier. Came down a little bit in the second half, but still overall just fine in the National League in terms of runs scored. I mean, they did have a negative run differential on the season, so we probably should have seen some more runs scored by this offense, but that's okay because the offense decided to score more runs when it mattered most, the postseason, because the runs per game for the D-backs went from 4.6 to 6.5 in the playoffs. And we've seen the D-backs do basically everything. We've seen both the answer backs and we've seen how a snake can also strike first, right? Because that's what a snake does, especially a black mamba. That thing strikes first. And so for the D-backs, they were the comeback kids all regular season. They were one of the best teams, if not the best team in the regular season, at coming back at multi-run deficits. And that's what we saw in the first 2 games against the Brewers when they were down early. They came back repeatedly and swept the Brewers in their own house. Then against the Dodgers, now they're the team that's going out there and scoring first, scoring early, being that snake that strikes first, strikes its opponent in prey. And so we've seen both sides of the D-backs. We've seen the predator that lies in waiting, watches their opponent get a little bit of a lead just to only play with its food and then come back. And we've also seen the D-backs be the killer, like in game 1 against Clayton Kershaw, where they just kept pounding him over and over and over again, and the offense has been really incredible to watch. 730 OPS in the regular season, 861 OPS in the postseason, and a lot of that is because of the power the D-backs have all of a sudden displayed in the playoffs. They were 22nd in home runs in the regular season, but entering today, the D-backs were the leader in the postseason with 9 home runs. They currently have 15 straight postseason games with a home run, which is the second longest streak in the postseason, which is the second longest streak in postseason history, I should say. And the D-backs are getting home runs from very unconventional guys on their team. If it was the Christian Walkers, who we know is one of the hardest hitting guys in baseball, super power guy, Ketel Marte, who can hit rockets, or Corbin Carroll, who can hit bombs, or Lourdes Gurriel. Like, if it was those guys that all of a sudden turned up the power in the postseason, I don't think it would be as surprising if the D-backs all of a sudden, as a team, led the postseason in home runs if they got it from their power bats. But they're getting it from guys like Alek Thomas, who is not a power dude. Guy like Gabriel Moreno, another dude. Both of those guys haven't showed the power in the regular season, but so far in the playoffs, they've done that. And of course, the stats that always matter the most. This D-backs team, with the runners in scoring position, they're batting .324 in the playoffs. And they have a .905 OPS with runners in scoring position as well. With runners on, the D-backs have the best average and OPS in the postseason, 327 average and 969 OPS. This team has been elite at bringing the runners home when they got their opportunities. That was something that you wanted the D-backs to do a little bit more of in the regular season. Guys like Christian Walker always kind of struggled with runners in scoring position. Ketel Marte was good, but compared to other second basemen, he might have not been as good as a pair, compared to like Ozzy Albies or Luis Ariz. But in the playoffs this year, all those D-backs players have been coming through with runners in scoring position. As a team, they are at least coming through runners in scoring position. And they're also coming through with two strikes. This D-backs team has the best OPS this postseason with two strikes on the count. This team is not wasting any plate appearances. We saw with that Alec Thomas at bat where he had 14 pitches that ended in a home run, the most pitches in postseason history that have ended with the at bat in a home run. This D-backs team have been patient. They've been waiting for their pitches. I think they're playing really smart. Someone like Geraldo Perdomo, I just love watching because I feel like his IQ, I feel like he's so locked in terms of what's a good pitch. I think he has like the best eye on the team in terms of the quality pitches of what to hit and what not to hit. I think Perdomo just gets really good at bats. I think a lot of these players feed off of Perdomo because of the eyes he has in the batter's box. So I love what the D-backs have been doing from an offensive standpoint. I think the biggest catalyst from the D-backs offense this season is Corbin Carroll, is arguably the best player this postseason. Now we'll get into a few more numbers for the D-backs with how they performed in the postseason this year. But before we get there, I first want to talk to you guys about FanDuel because October baseball is back and you can make your postseason debut with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Join FanDuel today and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to create your new account. Then you can get in on the action from the first pitch until the final out. Bet on everything from strikeouts to home runs to who will win the game. And if you don't want to wait the whole game to get a W, predict what will happen in the next at bat with quick bets. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay, and you could have made a lot of money this postseason with the D-backs. Take the D-backs money line, which has been plus money every game. I think in game 3 with the D-backs at home, it's plus money again. So take the D-backs, take the over on the runs, and really just parlay those two things, and you will win money on the D-backs. If you did that every game this postseason, you would probably be a millionaire right now. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. Step up to the plate this postseason with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And don't forget to catch every D-backs pitch on their hometown broadcast when you download the Sirius XM app and search up Diamondbacks. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, and let's wrap it up with a couple more numbers. The next number I need to tell you guys is the number 1. That's it. Just the number 1. Only one error. If you can't hear me, one. Only one error this postseason for the D-backs. And to be honest, guys, it was kind of BS. It was that Ryan Thompson little comebacker. He had it. It just hit like the heel of his glove. He was falling over as he was doing it, tripping. I just think it was unlucky. I think the D-backs defense has been elite. Alec Thomas, Corbin Carroll in the outfield just gobble up everything. The range on those two guys, phenomenal. Christian Walker, elite once again. And if you actually look at the D-backs defense from the regular season, best fielding percentage this regular season of all Major League Baseball teams, least amount of errors committed this regular season. This D-backs team on defense just does not make mistakes. And even during the D-backs down years the last few seasons when they haven't made the postseason, defense has always been their strength. Defense has always been a calling card of this D-backs franchise. You can even say over the last few years under the Torey Lovullo regime, you can say defense has been the backbone of this franchise, and they have been playing defense this postseason, and they've been playing defense all regular season as well. The metrics tell you the D-backs have probably a top 2 defensive outfield, either them or Milwaukee. Gabriel Moreno, I think quite easily was the best defensive catcher from this past regular season. Number one in assists, number one in defensive runs saved, and number one in caught stealing percentage. And then, of course, Christian Walker, just once again, best defensive first baseman in baseball. He won the Gold Glove last year. You look at those advanced metrics on Fangraphs, he's basically top 3 in like everything. And you just watch him the postseason, like how many balls down the line does Christian Walker just gobble up? Like he's insane defensively. I feel like nothing gets past him. And I feel like I honestly just never see Christian Walker make a mistake. Like, when's the last time you were like, man, what was Christian Walker doing on that play? Why did he make that decision? Feels like anytime Christian Walker makes a play, it feels like the right move and the smart move. So this D-backs defense, I think, is the true calling card of this franchise the last few years. And once again, they've been dominant in the regular season, and now they're dominant in the postseason. Then the last stat that I want to give you guys before we wrap up the podcast is two stats, actually. 2.25 and 1.15. The first number, that's the entire staff ERA this postseason. And the second number is the entire bullpen ERA this postseason. So staff ERA this playoffs, 2.25. Bullpen ERA, 1.15. The rotation so far has easily matched what the Brewers did, because when you think of Corbin Burnes and Freddie Peralta, like those are two legit frontline starters. And Brandon Pfaadt didn't match Corbin Burnes, but Zach Gallen definitely matched a Freddie Peralta in game 2. Merrill Kelly definitely outplayed Clayton Kershaw in game 1. And Zach Gallen definitely outplayed Bobby Miller in game 2. Like, this D-backs rotation have just outplayed what we've seen against their opponents cumulatively. Of course, Brandon Pfaadt, which is not good in that game 1. Then the bullpen has been just as good as well, because the Dodgers bullpen, of course, has been really good. When their starters come out, the Brewers bullpen looked pretty good as well. But even with that being said, this D-backs bullpen has been able to match both of those teams, who I think I have bullpen ERA stats pulled up right here. If you actually look up bullpen ERA, number 2 was the Brewers, number 3 was the Yankees, and the D-backs, and that's in the entire Major League Baseball. So Brewers and Dodgers in the National League were number 1 and number 2. And in this postseason, the D-backs have been able to match both of those bullpens, which is insane. This D-backs bullpen, like I said on a bunch of podcasts, 18th in ERA, and that's only because this D-backs bullpen finished really good in the final month of the season, and they've been able to carry that momentum into the playoffs. Only Brandon Pfaadt, Miguel Castro, and Zach Gallen have allowed runs this postseason. I think Castro did it in a pretty nonsense way. I'll have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure it was in that game 1 against the Dodgers, right? Or was it, I don't remember which game. But I remember the runs that Castro allowed really didn't factor in at all. Of course, Brandon Pfaadt struggled in game 1, and then Zach Gallen still got 3.1 ERA this postseason, so he's been fine. The D-backs pitching staff, the entire staff, 1.28 whip, top 3 in the postseason. They've done a great job of just limiting walks and hits this playoffs. And they've only allowed 2 home runs this playoffs as well, tied for the fewest among all teams, which is just really impressive, because either you would have thought maybe the rotation has allowed a few more, maybe because we've seen Gallen and Kelly give up home runs at times this regular season. Maybe you thought one of the bullpen guys were just finally going to turn back into a pumpkin, but that hasn't been the case. When you look at Ryan Thompson, Kevin Ginkel, and Paul Sewald, those 3 D-backs relievers have combined for 9.1 innings pitched, 6 hits, 13 strikeouts, and 2 walks. And the most surprising stat, very basic, very peripheral stat, but the D-backs have the most saves in the playoffs. Of course, they've played as many games as any postseason team, but 3 saves for this D-backs bullpen. Just have to do a quick round of applause for Paul Sewald and finally fixing this closer issue, because how many times over the last few years have we said this D-backs team is fine? They can be feisty, but they are never going to do anything. They're never going to be truly good until we can figure out the closing situation. We've tried so many past their prime, old, crusty, rusty, musty, dusty veterans in that number 9 spot, in that closer role. All of them have failed except Paul Sewald, who has struggled a little bit in the regular season, at least gave you some shaky appearances, probably overworked in that regular season as well, because the D-backs were not afraid to spam a Paul Sewald in the 9th inning. But in the postseason this year, he's looked absolutely phenomenal closing out games in the 9th. Kevin Ginkel has looked absolutely phenomenal as the 8th inning guy. And then Ryan Thompson has looked great in the 7th inning. And if you need to get out of a quick jam in the middle innings, Sal Frank, I believe, is your guy in that situation. So finally good to have at least 4 guys that you could trust in the postseason. And who knows if Kyle Nelson or Joe Mantiply ever get back to it as well. It would be absolutely insane if the D-backs have a full complement of relievers that you could just throw out there from the pen. I can't believe what I've seen from this D-backs bullpen this postseason. I can't believe what I've seen from the rotation. I can't believe what I've seen from the offense. I just can't believe what I've seen from the D-backs. I'm hoping this gravy train won't stop anytime soon. I would be okay if this gravy train stopped in the World Series, but honestly, let's just go take it all. Let's sweep the Dodgers, and then let's go win the World Series. That's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage insight. We'll be recording after the D-backs sweep the LA Dodgers. We'll be talking about the NLCS. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. Thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. Make your second listen of the day the Locked On MLB podcast with our boys Sully Baseball. Don't forget to catch every D-backs pitch on their hometown broadcast when you download the Sirius XM app and search up Diamondbacks. If you like the show, follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account. Look up Locked On Diamondbacks both Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And of course, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.